I'm Carol Barron, the proud editor of I always want to say Francesca. It's Francesca Momplaisir, the author of My Mother's House. And I want to especially thank the librarians here today because I know they played a large part in her life as well as in my life. And those of you who have seen me before have heard about how I would sneak behind the racks at shelter of Sherwood Forest Library in Detroit, Michigan, where Nancy Drew was not allowed. It was considered not to be read by anybody who had any intelligence whatsoever. But at some point in time, when I finished reading the children's books, I would try to sneak over to the adult section. And when that didn't work, I went across the street to Don's Drugs, and for 25 cents, I could buy A Stone for Danny Fisher. Librarians wouldn't have liked that at all, neither would my mother and father. Confessions of a Spent Youth, I thought that was about a young kid by Vance Borgerly. Norman's Mailers, advertisements myself. But what I learned was, I learned about narrative, I learned about plot, I learned about storytelling, and I learned that I could learn from fiction what I might not be able to pick up in a nonfiction book. And that is the way I feel when I talk to you about My Mother's House. Basically, it's about a culture that I would have known nothing about, and now I know a lot about, and I can feel about. It takes place in South Ozone Park out in New York area, where after World War II, these houses were built for World War II soldiers, and they had bomb shelters in them because those were the days we all lived through duck and cover, and we thought we were going to be nailed by an atomic bomb. But the World War II vets moved out, and the Italians moved in, and they liked having a bomb shelter because they could do all kinds of things to their enemies that nobody would hear. But eventually, the Caribbean the Caribbean community moved in, and so did the Haitians. And this is told, in large part, the narrator is the house. Now, if anybody knows me, they know I don't like books about cats that talk, dogs that talk, houses that talk. But this house talks, and you listen. And you listen to what's going on in the house when it is a wonderful house to accept immigrants that come into the passing, to give them advice, to give them food. And when the wife of the owner of the house dies, terrible things continue to happen in the house. The narrator, the house, is not going to have any part of it and decides to commit suicide. And in doing so, and trying to burn itself down, learns even worse things about what's going on in the house. And with that, I will not tell you another word. It's a thriller. It will mesmerize you, but by the end of the book, you will never look at television again when you see immigrants trying to come into this country, live and survive in an area. Now, we did a lot of editing, like we all do now, through and talking about the book and the cover and the jacket and all kinds of things over email and over the phone, but we had never met. So finally we met, and I learned all kinds of things that I want to share with you about Francesca. First of all, a major academic. I was a little nervous being Big Ten, University of Michigan. She's academic at Oxford, Columbia, all kinds of degrees and everything. But the truth of the matter is, what I learned was when she was writing the book, she would check herself into a hotel because she was raising 2 teenage kids. And she would order room service, and grilled cheese sandwiches and banana bread were 2 of her favorite foods. We also learned that she liked to shop, which I can really appreciate, and when you see her, you'll understand that the taste goes with the shopping. There's a Nordstrom's around the corner. I'm sure you know all about it already. And also Netflix. I mean, we talked about Netflix and our famous, and we talked about the books that we loved, and I think now my duty and job will be to turn this over to her and let you meet her the way I met her over lunch at Malibus, and continue to enjoy having our conversations. And wait till you read this book. You will not forget it. Francesca? Up here. Careful the wire. I have to take care of her.
Thank you. Thanks. All right, so I kind of want to read this book now. So thank you so much for having me, and thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate this opportunity. Carol gave away my secret about my love of fashion, and I actually just came from Nordstrom's. Snuck in to get my makeup done. So I didn't know there was one around the corner, otherwise I would have gone there instead of the one by me in New Jersey, but I'm here. So I want to let you know that if you see me checking my phone, it's not because I'm texting or talking to anyone or checking my email. It's because I take notes on my phone always. And when I'm writing, I actually will wake up in the middle of the night and I'll be like, okay, I can't forget this. And I'll just turn on the phone, have the screen there, and then just jot notes down. So thank you, Apple. You run my life like Amazon and Whole Foods. So I wanted to tell you about my history with libraries. So my older sister, would drag me to the library with her. And while she would go and read Judy Blume and sneak in to read Stephen King, I would be reading the Archie comics. So I never actually expected to become a writer because I wasn't an avid reader, which is odd because I ended up getting a PhD in comparative literature. Not sure how that happened. I blame my sister for it, but here I am. So libraries have definitely featured prominently in my life. I actually worked at a great library when I was in high school. It's called Poets House. Down in Soho now. It used to be housed in Humanities High School. So I interned there for a year, and for better or for worse, I actually used to take books home with me that I wasn't supposed to, but I'd bring them back. But I had the opportunity actually not only to read, but also to encounter a lot of really great poets. And that's what actually got me more into writing and reading a lot of poetry, specifically by African Americans and Caribbeans. And so, while I love libraries, unfortunately, I don't take my kids to libraries. And I've learned that my 9-year-old is a bit upset with me because, the library that he goes to is always the school library. And recently he went for a play date with some playmates, a young woman who has 3 children, bless her heart. No, 3 children between the age of 1 year and 4, which is like, whew. And she hates to be inside on rainy days, and my son was over there for a play date, and she took him to the library. So he comes home and he's like, Mommy, you're not gonna believe this. I went to this place and there were all of these books and it was huge. And it's the most books I've ever seen. And I was like, oh, a library? And he was like, yes, it was a library. It was absolutely amazing. And he just keeps going on and on about this library. And of course, I ended up feeling like shit as a mom. Like, oh my gosh, here I am, I'm a writer and I didn't take him to the library and now he thinks I'm horrible. But once I got over that, I realized, I'm going to have a great story to tell the librarians. So, everything works out for the best. So Carol spoke about my background. I actually grew up in South Ozone Park, Queens. I'm originally from Haiti. I actually was born honestly on the dirt floor of a mud hut. And we came to the US when I was almost 2 years old. And I actually grew up in South Ozone Park. That's where we lived for a very, 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 very long time until we went off to college. And I watched the neighborhood transform from an Italian neighborhood primarily to a mixed Caribbean neighborhood. Now it's primarily Guyanese. So it's a very, very awesome example of New York City and what happens to this city, and who lives here, who doesn't, who opts to, who lives in the suburbs, who lives in in the city proper, who can afford to live here, and really the great multiculturalness, I hate the D word, diversity, of this city that makes it so amazing and so fascinating. And while I've lived in a lot of places around the world, New York is always home because of how different people are. So I am the single mom of 2 boys. I have a wonderful 17-year-old and also the 9-year-old whom I mentioned. With my 17-year-old, in order to contextualize for him how monumental it was to be published by Knopf, I was like, oh my God, it's so amazing. You're not going to believe this. They're the biggest, blah, 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 blah. And he's like, oh, it's like you got signed to Rockefeller Records. And I was like, we'll go with that. Whatever frame of reference you want to use so you can understand. And so my children are actually quite fascinating. They've asked me a million times, Mommy, do you write about us? And I'm like, ooh, no, you do not want to be in anything I write, because then that would mean that I've done something really, really wrong as a parent. But maybe later on I'll be able to weave them in there, some characteristics of them. Being an immigrant really obviously informed this book tremendously, and it was really, this upbringing in this really wild and crazy place that was still transforming. And some of our neighbors were Italian, a lot of our neighbors were Caribbean, and some Latinos, but the Italians were moving very, very quickly out of South Ozone Park to Long Island primarily. The majority of the Italians who remained were affiliated with the Catholic Church and the Catholic school that I attended for 8 long years. No, actually 8 wonderful, wonderful years, because my teachers were absolutely phenomenal. And I remember I think it was my 5th or 6th grade teacher talking about World War II and about the era of mass production and how all of these houses had been built and they look exactly alike. And some of them had these bomb shelters or these places in the basements that were safe rooms. And I never thought that would ever feature anywhere in my life. And of course, I didn't know that I wanted to be a writer at the time, so I didn't think it was going to feature in writing. But it did. So some of the research I did was about that, as well as other parts of South Ozone Park. Now, part of the novel also takes place in Haiti. And although I was born there, I was not raised there. But I did, my parents tried to make sure that we actually made at least one pilgrimage. And it wasn't until I was an adult graduating from college that I actually went to Haiti. But for this book, I actually, my sister again, we took a little trip, very impromptu and impulsively, because I wanted to see the place again. And it was really, really important for me to actually see the architecture, see the dirt of the place. And it really transformed what I was going to write or what I was writing at the time. And it really also helped me to understand my parents and who they were. So now, my parents are odd inspirations for my writing. My mother could cuss you out in phenomenally creative ways that you would not imagine. And so when she would tell someone off, it would really, really pierce them and also leave them thinking, like, how the heck did she come up with that combination? My father was a great storyteller. His stories were immemorable. Immemorable, no, they were very memorable. They were indescribable. And part of them were traditional Haitian folklore, and some of it was stuff that he made up. And he couldn't actually repeat the same story twice because he made them up and he didn't remember a lot of them. The other part of my culture that features in the novel is really the language. Haitian Creole is one of the national languages of Haiti, finally happened in the 1990s. Previously it had been French. And Creole is a very creative language. It is a created language, like a lot of the pidgins and patois and vernaculars that were created by the descendants of slaves in the Western Hemisphere. It's a delicious language. And I'll give you an example, and I hope that no one here is offended by a little cussing. So there's a curse in Creole that people equate to motherfucker in English. Don't worry, I will explain. So it's colonguet maman. So it's colon, which is colonizer. Get actually means to fuck. And then there's mother, okay? So this curse came together during slavery as an amalgamation of French and Wolof and potentially other West African languages to form this really, really odd type of language that I hope Carol will say that is woven throughout the novel. And it makes it a little bit crazy, the language. But the other thing that really, really makes this crazy is the house. Now, I wouldn't say that I stumbled upon it accidentally, but the house really is one of the protagonists of the novel. So if I describe this novel, there are actually three protagonists. There are no supporting characters. I don't consider them that. There are three main characters, and the house is one of them. And I really wanted to create something or a space that was more than a setting, that was truly a living, breathing entity that has agency, that can act, that can think, that can help, that can kill itself when it realizes some of the things that are going on under its roof. So I really wanted to assign life to this entity. And, you know, a lot of people speak about the energy of a room or the energy or the feng shui or what have you, or the spirit of a space. But I really wanted to make this like a person. And it's not traditional personification. It actually is having an entity that is real and that can actually act. The other unlikely protagonist is this, I guess we can call him a psychopath, Lucien Louverture. And I wanted to explore the nature of psychopathy. So I did a lot of research and read a lot of books to understand psychopathy. And I don't know if anybody knows this, but psychopaths are very difficult to diagnose because they seem so normal and they operate as normal, and they do not acknowledge their own mental illness, and therefore they can actually be amongst us. I might be one. And you wouldn't know it because I wouldn't tell you. But they operate amongst us and they seem so absolutely normal and even good and welcoming and loving that you never imagine the things that they're up to. And so that character is dueling actually with the house. They're competing to have their own will fulfilled in the house. And so that's what, for some reason, Carol fell in love with and what had been living in my head for about 18 months or so. And I'm just really, really excited to have others read it and to delve into it and to invest in learning about a different, very different culture that is the culture of New York City. So I thank you again, and I hope that you will acquire this book, and I promise not to come to your libraries and actually carve my name out either. One thing I do have to say, Ifya, is that I actually, my parents tell me, was born with a caul. And in Haitian tradition, babies born with a caul or people born with cauls are said to be clairvoyant. Don't know if I actually am, but I did have a dream that I was running late to this event. And true to form, because I went to Nordstrom's, I was a little late, so I apologize. But I do thank you for your patience, and I tremendously appreciate this audience of readers.